Great. I hope you got in the mood for biodiversity. And we're live from Sweden. And there's still people joining the webinar. And we will build up the engagement as we go. So welcome to all. My name is Erik Svan. I'm working with HUGSI.green for Husqvarna. And together with our friend here, Magnus Tuvendal, will guide you through this City Biodiversity Masterclass webinar. So it's a real deep dive into the new biodiversity KPIs that we have launched to HUGSI this year. And it's a great opportunity, we hope, for you to learn more about it and also to ask questions. And so we together can form a better understanding on how this works, how it's done, how it can be applied. And this is the first version of this. So we're also looking forward to input and feedback from you guys out there so we can have a continuous improvement on this. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A in the end. So you can use the chat here to communicate, provide feedback as we go, but also use the question box there to put in your questions, and then we wrap it up in the end with that. I think that's great. And before we go through the agenda, I just want to let Magnus in and share a bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Magnus Tuvendal. I'm sitting in Uppsala, Sweden right now, and I work as an environmental consultant, broadly with sustainability, but specifically with ecological sustainability. I'm specializing in the application of the ecosystem services concept in sustainable city development and increasingly in business practices. And this includes how to articulate the value of nature and how to make progress in planning and decision making, even when conflicting views of nature meet.
Super. And as you know, I guess many of you also watched the HUGSI event a couple of weeks ago, and Magnus was also our guest at that event, and we have had really good time during this year building this new feature that we'll discuss today. And we're in the middle of the intersection, as you understand. We will go into how, just an introductory to city biodiversity first, how to understand and manage that in the city. It's a hot topic all across there. And I know there are representatives from many cities in this webinar today, and we also expect that many people will view this while it's sort of as on demand on YouTube and such. So I think this is a very key topic for many municipalities. So that's why I'm really happy that you're actually watching this and being part of this. One of the main points of this webinar is also to explain the method behind this. What are the considerations and decisions we have made to construct these new KPIs? And that's important to understand. And then we will have a short section on how you can benefit from this and provide some examples. So very simple structure, but hopefully we can get into the nitty-gritties of this. And now we see that the number of participants are starting to grow also. That's great because we have representatives from many different countries, which is really cool. We have people signing up from Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands, the US, Canada, Brazil, Japan. We have a small delegation from city of Malmö in Sweden. That's really cool. So we have many different roles, like Magnus, environmental consultants, municipalities, representatives from academia. We also have lots of colleagues actually from Husqvarna joining to learn more about these features. That's also really great. So let's get started into this. And first, just for you, if you don't know about HUGSI and HUGSI.green, that's a service from Husqvarna providing objective and recurring monitoring for today hundreds of cities in more than 60 countries. And through this service, we provide objective monitoring with recurring annual analysis of the urban green space in these cities. It's all analyzed and visualized on the website, available to anyone. So we hope to bring a new baseline to cities when it comes to urban green data. And we're really happy to have all cities onboarded here. And we hope that it's a useful tool for the cities being monitored. And we're building this on the green KPIs of HUGSI. So that's how we're quantifying and bringing the data together. And that's available through the historic graphs year on year. So you can follow the trends, how the green is growing like that. Data is also shared on the interactive maps. So you can really understand how the city is built up. Where do we see changes and so on happening? And as we're doing this objectively and in a very repetitive way, we can also provide you to compare data with other cities. And through the ranking and rating, you can understand sort of where you're at in your own city. But of course, the performance of cities, of course, it's related to policies and activities, but also a lot on heritage and the location, where in the world your city is located. So you have different conditions on being green. So that's important to understand and have with us. And the focus for today is the new Biodiversity Alert feature. And some of you have seen the event, so you know a lot about it. But today, as we said, we will deep dive into really understanding these KPIs, the nature potential score, the nature connectivity score, the biodiversity indicator score. I'm mentioning them now, but we will repeat that. So hopefully you know this by heart in the end, and how you can actually benefit from this the graphical interface and the information shared in the website. And hopefully there will also be a lot of questions on this, so we can manage what we cannot really convey in our presentation. Hopefully we can enlighten you also by answering your questions. So I think that's really cool. So let's step into more like our agenda here, and how to understand and manage city biodiversity. What's your take on this, Magnus? What's biodiversity to start with?
Well, it's a very big concept, and
Yeah.
The definition is something close to the variability of nature, and it's on all levels, all scales. You can have variability within genes and within species and between ecosystems. And this image is representing for the sort of main hotspots, or really big hotspots of biodiversity in the world. We have rainforests, and we have coral reefs, we have fine moss from South Africa, and streams that you find in many places. All these places or biomes or ecosystems are very high on biodiversity. But we also have biodiversity in cities, and that has been a growing concern, perhaps the last 20 years or something like that. We haven't really researched this for a very long time. Biodiversity for many are, you think of these places, you think of these exceptional places and hotspots, but urban biodiversity is a really big thing.
Great. And of course, we will focus more on the urban part, and I think that's something that is not really top of mind like that, but that's actually something we can actively work with. And I think to do that, you need to find ways to measure biodiversity, and I guess that's more or less your day job, Magnus.
It is. It's a big part of it, but I would say that before we measure and before we develop tools, we actually do need to ground ourselves in a why. We need to have motivation, and that's still a really big part of my job. And I have sort of put up 4 points here. You can give more, but these are four reasons for why we should measure biodiversity. And the first one is really not to squander an invaluable capital that's taken hundreds of millions of years to create. To me, it's really I'm tempted to use harsh language, but really we shouldn't waste this. It's very foolish. And biodiversity is also the fuel of evolution. So future possibilities, if you're thinking long term, really is limited by today's biodiversity. And also biodiversity provides redundancy and increased adaptive capacity to withstand disturbances. So if we want to have healthy nature and the services from nature in the future, we need to have nature and patches of nature that can withstand fires or virus outbreaks or climate change and sort of bounce back. And biodiversity is a big part of this. And you could say that biodiversity is a measure of ecosystem health or health of nature. And we are all dependent upon ecosystem services that derives from nature. Human civilization could not exist without it. So these, I would say, are four really big reasons that could motivate people that otherwise perhaps are not sort of inclined to be particularly interested in nature. But there are good reasons, even so, to work with this.
Interesting. And with biodiversity, we have different viewing points. One is so far in HUGSI, we have had a very human-centric perspective, like green space for humans. But there's other aspects as well.
Yes. We really need to work with the green space in cities for two reasons. We need to work with it to increase or maintain biodiversity, because we need biodiversity, as said, as a measure of health of ecosystems, but also for the services that these ecosystems provide humans. And here we have a situation where we actually need ecosystem services where people live. And people live in cities. I think it's 2007 when we had this cross where actually more than 50% of the world's population live in urban areas. And the projection is that in 2100, 90% or above will live in urban areas. So we humans do need ecosystem services in cities. But it's also, for instance, pollinators is one of these non-intuitive things that around cities we often find agricultural lands in many countries, and those can be low on pollinators, where cities may actually be sources for biodiversity to the surrounding land rather than the opposite.
Yeah, so there's the combination of the wild nature and the urban parts. That's sort of to make that work is sort of the future.
Yeah, we need to sort of crack this. We need to live, as Aldo Leopold says. We need to solve the problem of living on a piece of land without spoiling it.
Yeah. Cool. And I guess this is part of the ecosystem services provided.
Yeah, it's part of an important part of working with biodiversity, urban biodiversity, and urban nature is to understand that when we are comparing different kinds of solutions, or we are comparing what we get and what things cost, that we understand that urban nature and ecological systems, they provide services in a different way than technical solutions. We have with urban nature, for instance, we can have a patch of land a small urban forest, for instance, that actively reduces heat islands, supports water retention and water quality, reduces stress, anxiety, and depression from those that live nearby. We get UV protections for harsh sunlight, and at the same time, we support biodiversity. Many of these services mentioned, we have technical solutions for this. We can work with sunscreen, we can invest in air condition, drainage systems, and we can buy more antidepressants. But sort of a typical or a specificity sort of technical solutions is that they are designed to solve a specific problem. That's almost a definition of a technical solution. So a drainage system does very little for anxiety, and sunscreen doesn't help to reduce heat islands. So when you're comparing different solutions, you need to understand that urban nature actually provides a multitude of services and values at the same time.
Exactly, and they add to each other, and they keeping a balance like that. And one of my favorite movies, I always bring that up in this situation, the Biggest Little Farm. If you haven't seen it, you should do it. And I think they're really restoring an old orchard that has sort of the soil is dead, and it's not a successful farm, but they regenerate that into very vibrant and biodiverse area, and where they're also applying nature-based solutions for any of the problems that arise, which is really cool to see how the nature takes over, but it's nurtured and managed by the humans living there. And so I think that this coexistence is really fantastic, and where we can bring the effects and benefits out of it.
You can almost push it so far to say that the technical solutions mentioned here, they are created as a response because we have lack of nature.
Yeah.
So we had to use these technical solutions.
That's interesting. And looking at this sort of measuring part, like what can you actually measure about biodiversity?
Well, here you can work on different scales, and different cities and in different countries we have different traditions, and we have come sort of different. We're closer or more far away from where science and research show us. But we actually do know a whole lot about this. And in many cities, there are inventories taken. You're going out into the field and you're looking at what kind of species we have. You're measuring all kinds of things. And you can do that. Often you do that in sort of a planning stage where you have some kind of project you're intending to build, or you have a question whether or not you should build a road or a building somewhere, and you do inventories and you have a process to deal with this. But you can also make maps, more strategic maps, so you can have an understanding of and support for strategic planning. And cities, they grow over many years. Many cities are older than the countries they are within, and here we have also all kinds of maps that have been developed, and the data is just increasing. We have so much data on this now that can be used, and part of that is, of course, using satellite imagery to get this really objective overview that HUGSI is providing.
So spanning between the objectives and or macro level monitoring into the micro level. Here we need micromanagement. That's the term used in other areas, but here
we need very local understanding, because there are specifics in different places, and different places within the same city is very different, and you can have different objectives for different places. But it's also easy to get lost in all this. You can, if you're not sort of professional within this, if you're not an ecologist, you can find yourself with a heap of information that you really don't know how to interpret. So you need to have something to sort of go back and to see from sort of a helicopter perspective and understand, okay, what's the big things? What's the big blocks that we can play with? So where's that heading?
Exactly. And I think that was more or less the driver also for developing this feature as part of HUGSI.green to be able to provide this macro level view, because there's a lot of people working on the micro level assessment, experts in different types of nature, different type of species and situations, and that's great, and that should continue. But providing this macro level, I think that will be really interesting to see. And switching over into this section, we want to share more about the definitions and methods used in developing this. And speaking about definitions, that's where we started. And I think that you mentioned before, Magnus, that there's three aspects: the quality in the nature, but also the quantity of the nature and the connectivity of the nature. And
yes. I mean, so if you want to work with biodiversity and understand it, it is important to know the quality. What do we find in this particular place? And that could be a very low level, close to the ground measurements and inventories. But you also need to know,
sort of out of scope for us in that.
Yes,
that respect.
You won't find that on using a satellite imagery, not yet anyway.
No.
Who knows? Who knows what's up in just a few years? But today, not. So the quality, sort of and that's often what you get from inventories. You go in and you really you have expertise and you understand and collect information about what's at this particular location.
Yeah.
And the other two is sort of you need quantity. You need the area. How much do we have? How much nature? How much natural areas, or how much of green areas, green space do we have? And that's important. And then the third issue is: are these areas interconnected in some way, or are they part of a very fragmented landscape where the movement between these areas is difficult?
Yeah. So what we had to work with here is the kind of data that we analyze through HUGSI, and we have the hexagon shapes here, the most granular level that we provide in the interface. At least every hexagon is roughly 1 hectare in size, and we know a lot about that hexagon. For instance, how green is it? We know the distribution between different land use, the gray built-up area, the blue water area, the grass cover and the canopy cover per hexagon. So that was what we had to play around with. And together with you, Magnus, we made these definitions of the different areas. And the first were like the patch that we call it here, the area of high potential, like that. We can't really say so much about the actual quality, but it might have quality already, or it could be converted into a high quality area. So it's a high potential green we talk about.
Yes, we opted for discussing it as nature potential areas, and that is areas that as you can see here, that has a vegetation cover that exceeds 80%. So it is dominated by nature in some way, by vegetation. We don't know from the data we have whether or not this is a very big mowed lawn, or if it is some kind of very biodiversity rich meadow. But either way, this is a place that either has high biodiversity or could have, with a different way of maintaining this area.
And it's our assumption is also that it's probably more likely that you can convert an already green area into better green area than converting, tearing down buildings and roads. That happens occasionally, but it's not super easy. But,
yeah, you could even say that the area available, the area that we capture here is sort of the upper bound, the potential of how much the city can support biodiversity.
and
And do
80%,
that by different management regimes.
yeah, minus 80%, why not 100%?
Yeah, that's very. We have reasons for 80%, but the reason is really that you need to have a cutoff.
Yeah.
And 100% in an urban area, we will have difficulty finding that because there will be some kind of urban structure within a hexagon almost everywhere in the city. And these areas then are sort of urban areas that are dominated by nature. So it's above 80% vegetation cover.
Cool. Stepping into the next one, the corridor or the connector. What can you tell about that?
Yeah, so the first one is a measure that where we want to capture where do we have areas that with nature potential, and the other is to the degree these areas are interconnected, and we have chosen to have connectors that have vegetation cover above 20%. So this could be, this is a much more urban sort of feel to this. It could be city trees, but still roads and buildings to a large degree. And we have chosen to have, to create these connectors only between two patches. So it needs to be just one of these. So it's a distance also of approximately 100 meters between two areas of nature potential. So it's both a quality assessment, only 20% or above 20% vegetation cover, but it cannot be longer than one hexagon or approximately 100 meters. Then we count it as a corridor or a connector between two patches.
Yes, and also a remark is that we're doing this without any particular species in focus, because some species can, of course, travel larger distance, and some cannot. So
yes, precisely, and this is where we need to sort of go back and thinking, what can we do, and what can we do that is general for many cities around the world as sort of a base metric to follow. It's supposed to be metrics we can use to calculate these KPIs on a city scale. So this is we have these definitions of green areas, of nature potential areas with 80% vegetation cover, and we have connectors, and together, as we'll just get to, these can form components that are sort of interconnected patches of nature. But we have not a specific focal species in mind. That would be the next step. From this, you would like to, questions will be raised, and you will see a pattern in the city, and from that you will ask questions, and you will need, in many cases, to go deeper to understand sort of how does the landscape look for our particular species. Because some species can move over roads, some species cannot. And that will be different for different cities and different locations.
Exactly. Important remark. And these patches and corridors, they form into these components, making up these connected areas of high potential green space. And I think this is sort of the goal, is to have as many of these or as large and well-connected components as possible, right?
Yes, I mean, what we have here is a way of capturing, to a degree, the interconnectedness of nature potential areas within the city.
Yeah,
and they form then these larger areas. Potentially, for some cities, these can be very large, where movement is easier, where we can have exchange of various species between different patches. And that helps and supports biodiversity, because the habitat for moving around in is much larger.
So this was sort of the foundational definitions that led us into developing the KPIs for city biodiversity in HUGSI, and the nature potential area of more than, or at least 80% green, and then the connectors connecting at least two of those areas of at least 20%, and one hexagon in size. And those are expressed into these KPIs. You can see it for all cities part of HUGSI. And the nature potential score, essentially what it does, it tells you how much of the total city area holds high nature potential, right?
Yes, it's a measure of sort of the foothold nature has in the city. And as you alluded to earlier, we don't know the quality of this. In some cities, this might be areas with very high biodiversity. It could be very rich urban forests or other kinds of ecosystems. But it can also be very human influenced areas, but still green. But in either case, this is the areas where we will likely have, in the best case scenario, nature in the future. And they can be enhanced, and hence we call them nature potential areas. It is very unlikely and very costly to think that we will remove built up areas and introduce parks and introduce areas with high biodiversity. It is much more likely that we will enhance areas that today are green, though with low biodiversity.
Exactly. Next KPI is the connectivity score, and I guess you can understand what it means. It's how much of the nature that is interconnected part of the city. And of course, the higher number, the better in both of these scores. Anything to add to this? You can see on the illustration, of course, where we have these connectors.
Yes, for those sort of in the know, and if you're looking at the formula, that might look, you can think about different ways of calculating some kind of interconnected measure. And we tried a few, and actually found ourselves to converge on, almost surprisingly and by accident, that we ended up with something very close to what has been developed within the City Biodiversity Index, the recent versions. And it is a score that takes into account both the size of the patches and whether or not they're interconnected, because interconnectedness, the best interconnected patches are sort of within the same patch. Sort of the hexagons within the same patch is actually better interconnected than two patches with a connector between. So we need to account for both sort of this sort of interconnectedness and between patch connectedness. And that's part of the calculation.
And as a city, I guess with these two KPIs, you can work on increasing the total area of nature potential. And you can also work on trying to find areas where you can connect these patches. And so those could be used individually, but they can also be combined into this biodiversity indicator score. So it brings all those two together, so we can understand the buildup of the urban environment from a biodiversity potential perspective.
So this biodiversity indicator score doesn't provide new information. The information comes from nature potential score and nature connectivity score, sort of the area and the connectivity between areas. those parts. But there was an interest in having sort of a composite value to have, if you wanted to have one figure, if you wanted to sort of combine or compress data on biodiversity into just one number, this is a suggestion, the biodiversity indicator score, which actually combines these two, but it gives more weight to nature potential score.
Yeah.
Because looking at the literature, we know that the area, the nature potential area, the area of urban green space is more important than the interconnectedness between areas. You can't really compensate loss of areas with more interconnectedness.
Oh.
Interconnectedness is important, but area is fundamental.
Yeah. So I think that's also a very important definition and remark. Part of this KPI that you need to understand when you're using it. And as you say, it's connected to literature and relevant as such.
Precisely, and all these values are, of course, for a city. It's interesting to follow these year from year. You can have that as metrics. Are we moving forward or sort of backwards when it comes to biodiversity?
And I think we're already touching upon the benefit here. And you talked about the yearly development. We discussed the objectiveness of the data, and that's sort of what's in these KPIs. You can actually work on this to try to improve the potential you have and the connectivity that you have. You can benchmark and compare with others and all of that. But I think what we realized also in this sort of watching the KPIs is one thing, watching the maps is another thing. That something that reveals is another type of pattern here. And you can view your green space in many ways. One is just looking at an ordinary map. This is from the city of Lyon in France, a Google Maps picture here. So you can see green areas also in this picture, but you can also use other tools like HUGSI. This is the vitality view of the same city of Lyon. So here you can see all the areas where there is vegetation, and the different gradings there depends on the vitality, but that's just an example. But here it looks extremely green compared to the other one, and it doesn't really tell the full story. So with this view, then the biodiversity map of Lyon, then we have sort of taken out all the areas that doesn't bring this high potential, and we can also show the connectors between. So the saying that you can't really see the forest for all the trees, this sort of applies to that as well, that if we filter out the relevant areas, then new patterns appear that you can learn from and act upon. And one example is this one, areas to protect. What can we say about this?
Well, if you use this map, and it's interesting to point out the sort of the objectiveness of the data, that we get this from satellite imagery, and the method is the same for all these cities. I think that's important because you will have different methods in different cities, and they might be actually more suitable for your cities. But the comparison is also important, because then it will raise questions. You will have something to sort of bounce your own studies against. That can be interesting. And then if you zoom in, you can find a place like this one, for instance, where you have you can discuss sort of which places are more important than other places. Can we discuss that? Can we identify such places sort of strategic interest? And this patch that is marked in red is a place, a green potential areas where if this is lost, you will the connection between quite a few other green areas or green natural potential areas will also be lost. You will have disconnected this large component into two smaller ones. It's the only way in this map to move sort of from the left to the right.
Exactly. So losing 1 or 2 hexagons here could be worse than losing a couple of hexagons on the other patches.
It could be. It's certainly a warning sign. It's sort of
Yeah.
a flag. We wouldn't know for sure, but it's reason enough to go there and actually ponder on that question, to visit the place.
So for the cities joining the webinar here or viewing it, then they could use their maps to zoom in and find these areas. And then, of course, as you were on, to make their own assessment if it's worth protecting extra or just normal protection.
Precisely.
And the other thing here was areas to connect. We're using the same picture here, but then we have these sort of satellite patches there that could benefit from being connected to the components that we have there.
Yes, I mean, adding nature potential areas would be great if you can add sort of new hexagons in the map with over 80% vegetation cover. In some cases that might be possible. You can sort of enhance it from, I don't know, 70 to 80 or 60 to 80% vegetation cover. You can sort of move beyond the threshold for the map. But in most cases, it will be easier. It will sort of require less investments and be easier to add connectors in the landscape, to add connectivity, because that you might find you might find you are able to do that with clever green interventions that are not particularly costly and that are very much in line with still having an urban area or sort of an urban feeling of that part of the city.
Yeah. So this is something that we would like to learn also from the municipalities joining here and using this. If this could be a relevant tool for you to actually understand where to focus efforts, like coming back to also the human perspective or the nature perspective. For humans, it's interesting also to have a nice distribution of green in the city, but from a nature perspective, it might be interesting also to focus efforts on areas to combine and build these larger patches or build the larger components in the city.
Yeah, and the combination, we have quite a few sort of transversing or longitudinal, in a way, possibilities in cities where we walk or where we bicycle, and to make these paths also green sort of gives double benefits. We have paths that we very much enjoy moving along, but also we have paths that are not just paths for bicycle, but actually paths for other species to also move in the landscape.
Yeah, cool. So this was a few examples here and deep dives into the patterns that you can find, and to be on this macro level, to be strategic about biodiversity in your city. And then just a few words here on the City Biodiversity Index as well. That's sort of a pathway into also working more on the micro level and on the qualitative side. And a few words, Magnus, on CBI.
Yeah, this was the City Biodiversity Index, or the Singapore Index, was a really important initiative that came about with working on the Convention of Biological Biodiversity, and that came about, as it says here, 2008, the first version. The report you see there it's the number 98, but it's not 1998. It's a report from 2021. So the methods have actually sort of lived on. They have been developed, and it is a pioneering effort to find some kind of metrics for cities to work with if they want to work with biodiversity. And this one holds a whole range of indicators that you can calculate, where a few of them are now also included in HUGSI.
Exactly. So what you can do if you want to start working with CBI, then you bring the the values out of these indicators, and then there's in the handbook, you understand how you can rate and grade your values as part of the CBI tool. So I think this is also hopefully a great way to fast track into adopting this to work more on the quality. So eager to learn more about how this is being adopted also by the cities using HUGSI.
Yeah, and you could also almost mention that or you could mention that it's kind of a community also. There are people that are then using similar or the same methods, and there are experiences that can be shared, and all kinds of practical issues and methodological issues. So you can find partners in other cities through the Singapore Index or the City Biodiversity Index, which is a really good thing.
That's great. Cool. And I just want to remind you all also, if you have any particular questions or comments or remarks, please add it in the Q&A part here. We can bring it up soon. And before we head into that, we just pull out some examples here from the platform. How does this feature play out? This is from Los Angeles in the US. You can see how the KPIs are built up. You see the map, and we can just see that for LA here they rank pretty low on most of these numbers. Low percentage on the nature potential score, 3%. Average is 22, and also the nature connectivity is not very connected, and you can see it on the map as well. A huge city. You have lots of these green dots there, but pretty distributed. Any remarks from your side, Magnus?
Well, the big remark is, and we will see more examples, is that cities do look very different from each other, and we can see here that we have some sort of concentration in some areas, and in much of this landscape we have very little or very few of these hexagons with over 80% of vegetation cover. And those that we find dispersed are, some of them, or really quite a lot of them, are very isolated and far from other similar areas.
Yeah, exactly. So stepping into the next one, Nice in France. A totally different layout, of course, as you were onto. And very interesting sort of corridors there, very green in the western part of the city, northwest, like that. Totally different setup.
Yes, we have a totally different topology here with these both large green areas, nature potential areas, but they are also to a high degree connected to each other. And of course we have this. You can sort of imply that we have more urban, hardly urban, developed areas there in the center or to the right, so we have within the city limit as defined. We have sort of almost like a sort of a right side with very 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 much a sort of an urban feel, and to the left a much greener part of the city, of the same city.
Exactly, and we should remember that also in the foundation of HUGSI, we are focusing very much on the urban built-up part. So there is lots of people living in all the areas analyzed by HUGSI. So that's also important to bear with us. So it's not the outland. And I think together with both LA and Nice, they don't have so much of these edge effects that we have seen in other areas where the city is surrounded by green. So you have like a green border around, more or less. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
and I think it's more. You can see it more here in the city of Stockholm.
Yeah, you can look there, for instance, down to the right. There we have sort of a large area.
Now this is zooming somewhere completely different area, but
yes, sure. But the edges, in the edges, you can find the larger patches, and that is where sort of we are entering into a forested land, So we have these edge effects, which are important to be aware of. But overall, if we look at this city, we can see there's quite a lot of nature potential areas. We have the score, nature potential score is 21%, which is high, and it is quite evenly distributed within this larger urban area or urban region. The city
Exactly. So I think this is something to play around with. Everything of this is open in the platform, and review your city if it's in there, review your neighbor city, some other city, look into it and understand how cities can be built up from a biodiversity perspective. It's quite interesting. And also when you zoom in to the map, when you're close enough, then the hexagon view appears. So you can actually click on the hexagon, flip over into Google Maps, Street View, to have a feel for how does a high potential area look like in reality? How does a connector look like? So that's something that you can learn from, I hope, and of course also assess from your perspective in your city. So I think that's a really cool thing. And I think the takeaway here is, as you were on to, Magnus, cities look really different based on the build-up and their natural.
Yeah, I mean, it could be enlightening and fun to compare cities, and you can do that. But perhaps even more important is that you can compare with yourself. You can compare with yourself over time, and you can see trends. And HUGSI is here, I think, part of a very important way of providing data on urban nature and sustainability issues seen larger, because we have these simple metrics, but sort of absolute metrics. You can always ask, you can always do things, you can always have routines and ambitions to do things, but do these actions actually change something on the ground or not? And that kind of absolute measure is very important.
It's important, and sometimes it's depressing. You believe that you do a lot of things that is good and that is improving, but then you see the total net is actually declining. So I think that's a bit stressful at times, but you need to also see the reality for what it is. And that's what matters in the end. So you need to chew in that and try to be better, even better. And I guess with this kind of tools, you can also share with decision makers to make a difference in a way, based on the absolute numbers, the objective measurements. So I think that's great. And let's see if we get any questions. I haven't seen any questions from the crowd yet. So let's see. It might need to sink in a bit. And you're always welcome to reach out. We have our email address, hello@HUGSI.green. Send me a question there. We will bring it up in other areas. But hopefully this webinar is also like a piece of reference here. You can go back to what was the definition, how does this work, and you can understand that a bit more. Share it with your colleagues, share it with your friends. So I think that will be interesting to see also how this is adopted by you using the system and the data. And happy to hear back from you if there's any improvements you can see, or what you agree with, what you disagree with, how it's actually applied. I think both me and Magnus are really eager to learn about that.
Yes, I mean, it's really interesting to look at the data and to sort of get an understanding of how does the cities in the world look like?
Yeah,
that's I'm very curious about a deep dive into the data.
Exactly. So I think that's really great. And we can wrap this up, the webinar for today. We're approaching the end here, and I think we have managed to communicate and tell the full story here. And we'll continue sharing that, of course, and learning more how we can develop this. In the meantime, you can be sure to follow the work and communicate with us. We have the website, of course, our LinkedIn page. That's where a lot of information about updates go out. This webinar and all pretty much other content that we produce, that's sort of video content, will be shared on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out as well. The links to the LinkedIn page and the YouTube channels is always available also on the HUGSI website. If you scroll down to the footer, you will see it there. So that's a way to follow our work. So wrapping this up, thank you, Magnus, for being part of this and all your great work during this year with this feature. Really enjoyed working together.
Yeah,
and
it's been great.
Yeah. And also thank you to all participants in the webinar. So great that you signed up. Great that you were here. And also thanks to all the viewers watching this on demand. And be sure to reach out to us, as I said many times today. It's really a dialogue and conversation, we hope, over time. So thank you. And let's wrap this up.